Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. I hope you enjoy. The Human Art, written by Sandtrout. I sipped my tea as I read over the missive arrayed upon my desk. Good news or bad, it was difficult to say at the time. Almost anything that offered an end to the war ought to have been a welcome sight. Almost anything. The Admiralty would be incensed at the idea of accepting the offer, and even my guts turned as comprehension dawned. It would be shameful to accept, but my duty was not to pride, it was to my people, and on their behalf I considered the message. To negotiate on such terms was unheard of among my people. To even entertain the idea of ceding territory to these beasts would cause riots. To accept peace now would reek of defeat and demoralize our soldiers. Yet, as we fought, our young died in their prime, thrown into a bloody stalemate that has lasted decades already, and would last decades more. That is to say, if the food riots didn't destroy our industry first, leaving the Navy and Army to wither on worlds far distant from their homes without equipment and munitions to fight against an enemy they could barely comprehend. And so, I considered the offer on my desk for the sake of the survivors of this generation and the hopes of the next. The humans asked that we send representatives to meet with the representatives of the Monloons to, negotiate peace. The humans even offered to host a meeting within one of their systems near both of our and the Monloons' territory. It was also near the largest conflict zone, though not part of it. They said that this was to ensure the safety of the delegates, as any attack on the meeting by either side would quickly face a large force from the other, as well as the human security contingent. It was odd, still, that the humans would even consider such an intervention. In spite of their proximity to fighting in galactic terms, their system had been relatively untouched aside from the occasional raids from the deserters gone pirates. Neither side was interested in antagonizing our neutral neighbor because, while the humans likely weren't a match militarily for either of us or the Monloons, the majority of military power on both sides was directed at the other in an unstable stalemate. The humans were unique in that, it seemed, though. They were friendly not just with themselves, but actively sought conversation with any and every sapient species they met. And if rumors were true, a few non-sapient species as well. I'd always considered it amazing to the point of incredulity that they hadn't been conquered by one of those species yet. I suppose I should be thankful for their luck, as they might provide a chance to end this meat grinder of a war. The security was extensive. The human interstellar government had mobilized a naval strike force to sit in orbit, and given their history, probably had a couple more hiding in the asteroid belt, all ready to jump in at a moment's notice. I supposed I shouldn't have been surprised that they actively encouraged us to bring whatever ground security detail we felt was appropriate to ensure the safety of our delegates. I was certain that the streets outside the meeting looked similar to a combined arms battle currently being waged along the border worlds between my own species and the Monloon territory. Similar, except the lack of mass accelerator shots, plasma, and explosives creating a staccato lightning. The soldiers within my retinue were not our most skilled, truth be told, but they were our most disciplined, and they had been instructed to only respond after a verified first strike from the Monloon escort. I hoped the Monloon soldiers had received similar orders. When I exited the personnel carrier serving as my transport, it was in an enclosed garage, presumably below street level. My armored and armed security team stood in contrast to the simply garbed human interpreter. I had informed the human leadership that I was competent in understanding the Monloon language from intelligence intercepts, but they had insisted on offering their own interpreters for both delegations. At that point, I decided that this might have been a wise on their part, as I realized that I could not even interpret the human's expression at the time. "Good to rise," the human greeted me in a remarkably clear rendition of my native tongue. Given. "Good rise and be good," I gave the customary response as we entered the building. We've had the chance to meet, but what do we know about the other delegation? I asked, transitioning the human tongue and the last word, as there was no direct translation in our own language. English, they called the language, strangely. Not Terran, or Earthling, or human. English. It was just one oddity of an odd species, though, and I had decided not to ask into it. The Monloon sent a matriarch named Under River Over Forest, or at least that's the best translation my colleagues could come up with. The human spoke a bit slowly, but clearly, like a subordinate. That is, acceptable, I stated, as I processed the information. As per the terms of the agreement, I'm not familiar with my counterpart serving as the interpreter for an opposing delegation, and only your name and rank will be revealed to the matriarch, the human reassured me. I gestured in confirmation that I understood. I was the chief of civil operations under the Prime Minister, so I didn't doubt that the matriarch would be at least aware of my existence. For my part, our reconnaissance had informed me of the movements and actions of the matriarch, and assured me that she was capable of making decisions that would carry weight. We entered the designated room, my interpreter's chin held high in supplication, and I with my head lowered in authority. The other delegation entered from the other side, their human interpreter seated upon the sort of rolling sled that also carried a bloated matriarch. This lifted my hopes that even if the negotiation failed, the humans obviously respected myself and my people more than the Monloons. In the center of the room was a rectangular table with the long sides towards each incoming delegation. At one of the narrow sides sat a third human, dressed similarly to my own interpreter, though significantly older based on the light hair and wrinkles. My own security detail stared cautiously across the table at the armored Mondloons escorting the matriarch. The older human gestured to each of the delegations, and we both took our place at the table. Myself slowly lowering myself onto the cushion, and the matriarch's sled simply slid up to the table. Then the older human spoke, with my own and the Monloon's interpreter converting the words to respective languages. We now commence the first LRI conference regarding the war between the Monloon and the Imtali nations. The Imtali delegation has been granted the right to speak first. I nodded and spoke into my interpreter. I wish to start by asking which contested worlds the bug is willing to withdraw from to stop the war. My interpreter's face twisted as he listened, but he made no complaint and relayed the information to his counterpart in his own language, and then the Monloon interpreter recited the information to the matriarch. At that point, I realized how tedious this negotiation was going to be, and that I needed to weigh my words. To my grasp of their language, the matriarch responded with, "The ones that the lizard is tired of bleeding on." I started to bristle at the insult, but the follow-up by my interpreter assured me that the correct translation was, "There are many neither of us wish to die over." The human had already proven that he had a better grasp of my language than I had of the Monloon tongue, and the translation of the symbolic language was one of the humans' primary reasons for insisting on their own interpreters. The tedious dialogue continued back and forth for several hours as I agreed with withdrawal soldiers burning one of their agricultural worlds in exchange for the Monloon Navy lifting the blockade on a system housing one of our main industrial colonies, as well as a general agreement to hold existing military units from offensive operations until further negotiations could determine the final outcomes. Halfway through the negotiations, I had realized that my disrespect for the matriarch was childish compared to her own polite respect. I would make sure not to underestimate her next time. Conrad lifted his spear to his counterpart. "To saving the galaxy, one lie at a time." Naziha laughed and met his mug with her own wineglass. "To talking it out without a shootout." They both sipped before Naziha spoke again. "How long before they figure out how much we scrubbed that conversation?" "I give it at least 10 soda years. Either way, the Abyssin are as desperate for peace. I could practically smell it on him. Even if he figures it out tomorrow, I think he would thank us for it." "Yeah. Underriver was sick of needing to spawn a new brood every month just to keep the population stable." Nazaha looked contemplative for a bit as she sipped her wine, I'm amazed at how often a simple conversation calms things down so much, though. The elderly man that had been presiding over the talks stepped up to the bar to join the interpreters. "They never learned how to," he said as he sat. "I think of all of your assignments, all the culturally background and history that you have had to research before these jobs." Conrad chuckled. "It's easy. Most of them unified their cultures millennia ago. I had to do more research before I was confident that the Nazi's dad wouldn't kill me for dating his daughter." Nazar lifted her eyebrows suggestively at Conrad over her glass. "And I thought your parents were going to kidnap me for a baptism when they learned that I was Muslim." The old man grinned. "Exactly. Humans spread so fast and far on our planet that when we finally settled down, we didn't know each other existed, any more than we knew about the Monloons and the Mtali. When we started meeting again as civilizations, we were practically aliens. We learned how to deal with the others eventually, without needing just to eradicate them. We learned about the difficulties in communicating across cultural barriers and invested entire sciences around it. We learned that differences is sometimes useful and beautiful." Conrad pondered that for a bit. "I suppose I see your point. It would have been beautiful and hilarious if she'd actually worn the gold bikini." End of story. I would quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and Patreons. Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Barky, Lord Azrakal, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Dragzoon WRE, Holly's Sister, Arcadian. Thank you very much.